Hi, everybody, and welcome to the very first one of our series, CME in Conversation. So there's going to be various different videos of interviews with interesting people who can help us towards our CME studies, and those are going to be rolled out across 2024, with this being the first one. And I'm delighted to welcome my very good friend and author of this book, Events Are Easy, Dr. Paul Abbott, who is going to talk to us from his perspective as an event professional about what we can do in terms of partnerships, in terms of equality, diversity, inclusion, those kind of themes from the CME today. So welcome, Paul. Thank you very much for coming.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Liz. Thanks for having me on.
It's my absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed the book before I ask you any questions. And as you know, because we met through events, I do a lot of events myself, and I read this book because it was your book. And in all honesty, I wasn't expecting to learn anything because I do a lot of events, but I learned so much from it. I found it really, really fascinating, and really, really useful, and have been recommending it to everybody and anybody ever since. And I think what struck me and why I wanted to have this conversation with you from the book was that although I thought it was going to be a book about how to put on an event, which it is, there's also these really strong themes running through of equality, diversity, inclusion, equity, in how you put on events and in how you interact with people. And also there's a really strong feel for me about events being a partnership between you, the event organizer, and the venue or the event manager, or indeed both of those things, and all the suppliers who come together to create successful events. And that sort of got me thinking about the CME, because obviously, as we've spoken about prior to this conversation, we have various different units in the CME. Unit 2 is about planning, facilitating and evaluating teaching, and it has a little section all about partnership working and how music educators can add value to what they do by working in partnership. And one of the main things that our students tend to use as evidence for that is when they've put on performances and events. So I was really interested to talk to you from that angle. But also there is a whole unit about equality, diversity, and inclusion. And from the things that I've read in the book and the conversations we've had previously, I know that you'll have lots of really useful advice for us in that arena as well. So maybe we can start there, actually, if that's okay with you, Paul. So I just would be interested in your thoughts about how music and music education can really promote equality, diversity, inclusion. And I think our teachers on the CME, and indeed most teachers, are really, really good at inclusion in terms of learning needs. So when we're in the classroom, when we're teaching, we know that, we're down with that, we know exactly what we need to do. But perhaps where we don't really think about it so much is things like events and performances. We think about our students as learners and what they require from us and how to make our learning environment inclusive, but not necessarily those concerts, those performances in terms of what we do for our performers and indeed the audience. So I wondered if there was something you could share along those lines for us.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, for your audience benefit, I actually from a musical background myself, and so I studied clarinet. I'm a trained classical singer, and I'm also a composer. And I fell into events management, which is in some ways where the reflections come in the book, because I've been delivering events from concerts in my early days all the way through to managing a concert hall within the largest conservatoire in the UK. And I did that for about 11 years, up to director level. So I've got quite a broad range of experiences of working with very different people from all over the world in all kinds of different environments. And I think the first thing that I would say on this is that when you organize an event and you create an experience, and you're trying to do that for your pupils, your students, whatever the correct language is these days, and again, this is a starting point, I think you have to try very hard not to be hung up on EDI, diversity, accessibility language. And by that, I mean that we should all be striving for equity in the work that we do. And that should mean that when you put on a concert, for example, let's talk about that, that everybody involved should be able to take part in an equal way. Um, and taking part is about being on stage, of course. It's about the people who provide. So if you've got a choir and you have an accompanist, it includes all of those people and all of the support professionals who sit behind it. But it also includes the audience members themselves, and that can be anybody from, well, actually an unborn baby and a pregnant mother, all the way through to somebody who is perhaps on end of life care, and all of the different gamut of people who can be within that environment. And when you think about the scope of people who could be in the room, that's daunting. It's really, really daunting. If you actually take it seriously. So my number one thing is this: take it seriously and really think that everybody needs to have a good experience. If you start from the people on stage, remember that, and I'll put some context on this from personal experience, the experience of the people on stage is not going to be the same as the experience that they've had in a classroom with the normal lights on. The experience of being able to get it wrong. Um, as good music educators, the opportunity for somebody. I mean, I used to sing in choirs. I was one of Yorkshire Baroque soloists. If you make a mistake, you put your hand up, right? And it doesn't happen in all schools, but when you get to a certain level, that's the thing. And this, Liz, you're a singer. You put your hand up and you say, "I made a mistake," and everybody knows. As professional musicians, we learn the hard way to deal with making a mistake and how to cover it and how to keep your face. It doesn't mean you don't go to pieces off the stage. So that pressure to be right, it's really important to educate your students that sure, somebody might notice, but the world didn't end by making a mistake. And if you're in an educational context, I've worked with lots of schools coming into a venue. I worked with HE students, of course, but I delivered a lot of events with local schools coming in, and I would very often get up and talk to them en masse and say to them, "Look, your experience today is about your education. Sure, we're putting on a show, and we're going to ask you to do things a certain way. We want you to walk on in a neat fashion or come on in a neat fashion, however that is. We'd like you to present yourselves in a smart way. But actually, the people who are sitting there looking back at you are there to support you. They're not there to criticize. So try to go with that feeling that the audience is behind you and with you." And from my own personal experience, I wasn't really taught that early on, and I wish I had been, because now that I understand that, when I go on stage, I know that I'm performing for them, but they're also listening for me. And I think if you can learn that and you can instill that, that has an impact in so many ways, especially if we're talking about accessibility. Students who've got anxiety, or anyone who has a neurodivergence in the way that their brain works, being able to set up an environment where you can thrive and encouraging that feeling that I can thrive, it is a really, really powerful thing. It's a really incredibly powerful thing, and it sticks for life. Those little lessons that you learn and the way that you feel early on have significant impact. But I think there are other quite significant things to consider outside of that classroom environment. Teachers are quite well versed in those areas. I'm partially sighted, or at least I refer to myself as partially sighted, because I have a similar eye condition to the one that Richard Osmond has, which is called a nystagmus, which means that my eyes move too much. It means I'm not allowed to drive. It means that under certain lighting, like an example is if LED lighting is used and the flick rate is quite low, it creates a strobing effect for me. So I go through life without people knowing about this unless I tell them. And I've been in situations before where I've stood on stage, both as a performer earlier on in my career when I didn't have the confidence, and it created massive stage fright for me, but also later on in my life as a keynote speaker and a presenter, that I've learned my ways of fixing it. But you might have young people that you're working with who don't have the confidence to put their hand up and say, and they might not be registered as blind or partially sighted, but the lighting that you choose, it might be too bright, it might be this or that. It can have a real detrimental impact. So it might be fine in the classroom, but as soon as you're in a stage lighting situation, you've got to think, can everybody actually see? So ask the question. And it's very often the question which is asked very generally, is there enough light? But that's not necessarily the challenge. So setting an environment in advance that if you've got somebody in your classroom who has like for example, if I was in your classroom, what would benefit me is that I know in advance that you're going to be listening to me on the day, so that I have an environment where I can come to you quietly and say, I'm really sorry, but I can't read the music. Because what happens for me is the music actually swims on the page. And what the experience I had early in my career, and I think this is really important example, is that I went on the stage in the evening and the lighting state wasn't the same as in the rehearsal on the day. And all of a sudden, I'm singing solo work from a score and I can't see it. And I knew it, but it was difficult medieval music. So I hadn't memorized it. What happens then? So, having that awareness that those things could happen is really important in setting that environment. But also, anybody who's got a physical disability, can you get them on the stage?
Mm.
This is such a massive issue, and it's a massive issue in commercial venues too. The number of particularly popular music, right? A lot of pop music venues, and which are being increasingly used for schools gigs, have steps to the venue
Mm.
and no wheelchair accessibility. I mean, I know a very good comedian in this area up here in Yorkshire who uses two crutches. And he can get on the stage, but it takes a lot of support from everybody around him to get him there. And the thing is, he's made that part of his gig. But really, he should never have had to. So going and looking at a venue and seeing what it's actually really like and thinking through all of the contexts of how that works. And is your school hall accessible? And if it's not, if you're doing a gig in the school hall, how are you going to change that up? What can you do? There are plenty of professionals out there who, for a fee, will come and do something for you. For example, putting ramps in or whatever. And if you haven't got that, think early about sponsorship. Change the venue, change where you're going to do the work. So there's all sorts of things that sort of happen in terms of accessibility to the stages. And the same applies really to your audience. So when we will talk about partnership a bit later, but I went back to my old school recently and I noticed how different the way that the furniture is laid out is from when I was there 20 many years ago. But just sort of reflecting back on that today, I'm thinking if I was running a concert in that environment, you might have somebody who is a parent who's a wheelchair user. In a professional concert hall, that person will get 2 tickets, not 1. Are you doing that in your school? Is that part of the makeup? Because it's normally expected that somebody who cares for them and they need their carer with them, that spare ticket comes with them and that seat is organized and reserved so that nobody else can take it. Because if you do the bun fight seating where everyone just comes in and it's a free for all, that's fine if you can do the trolley dash to get to the seat. But that doesn't work for everybody at all. And again, back to the lighting thing. If you're giving out a program, have you got a version that everybody can read? Is it large enough? So there are all those accessibility things. But then also, when we talk about equity, you need to get into the real sort of nuts and bolts of this in terms of the range of diversity of people who can be in the room. Are you programming dead white male composers in classical music? Are you programming bands that were all made up of men? And there's a lot of discussion about this. The thing that I would say is that there is plenty of information out there now to be able to do better and program better. So, you know, in terms of those mixes of ethnic backgrounds and of the balance of women and female composers, female songwriters, all of that. It's really important. And actually making sure that you're actually then doing that gender balancing with the performers themselves. There's a lot out there that can help you, but it's down to you to do the research and to do something positive about it. The other thing that I would say is that if you're looking at your school concert and you are programming the music that you do in the school, that's not necessarily all the music that happens in the school. I used to sit on the board of a South Asian arts charity, which has its own music school. And the music that happens there is phenomenal. Now, how often does the sitar player or the tabla player get an invite to perform in the school concert? Technically, they will probably wipe the floor with most of the other musicians who are the grade 8 clarinetist or the grade 8 flute player or whatever. But are they actually included? And if they are included, is there an environment set up which is actually culturally correct for the performance of their work? You know, things like having the right kind of flooring, having the levels right at which that person performs, so that the balance of the audience is correct. If you're not sure, get in touch with who they're studying with and ask the question. There's a lot of talk about, you know, if you don't know something about equality and you don't know something about somebody else's culture, well, you mustn't ask them to fix it for you. Absolutely right. Sure. Don't go and phone a black person and say, can you fix the fact we don't have enough black people? But do phone a cultural organization or you know, or talk to somebody that you know to do some research and understand why people can't see themselves in that environment. What are the things that put people off? And that spreads then into your audience. If somebody doesn't feel comfortable, what are the barriers? Who can you ask to tell you what those barriers are? And so that's both on stage and off stage. And I'm quite conscious I'm talking a lot of different things here. So do dive in, Liz, and tell
No,
me just
absolutely fascinating. And I think that that point, that's a really good point. And I remember um about 18 months ago, I was on a panel about decolonizing the curriculum at a conference, and in my preparation for that, as a sort of middle class, middle-aged white lady, I was like, I'm going to have to be really, really careful here, because, you know, I'm aware that I'm very, very privileged, and, you know, it's I kind of felt like it wasn't my area to get involved with, other than that I know that it is wrong that you know, the curriculum is often very white male heavy for music, you know, and if you look at things like the history curriculum, they become even worse, because they're very British centric, and it's very kind of all about Britannia ruling the waves, and just glossing over all the other dodgy stuff that we did. And during my research for being on this panel, I started to think about schools and the makeup of school communities, of staff and governors, and senior leadership. And I found a statistic that said that in England, 90% of all the teachers in England are white, and 95% of all head teachers are white. So then it becomes this kind of, it's all very well going, well, it is everyone's problem, but it's not my place to fix it. But actually, if the 90% of teachers are white aren't fixing it, that means the 10% of teachers who are not white are now, presumably their entire job is just trying to fix the mess that our ancestors made. Not wanting to get too deep on it, but it's really important. And I think people are frightened because they don't want to upset somebody else, and they don't want to say or do the wrong thing. And you mentioned right at the start about terminology and not getting worried too much about terminology. I think people are so terrified sometimes of saying or doing the wrong thing that they kind of back away, and the problem self-perpetuates, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I've been reflecting on that, the fact that, I'm white, middle class, 44-year-old guy, right? I'm also queer and partially sighted, but that's fine. You are a woman in music. You've had that experience. Everybody has a personal experience, which is different from somebody else's experience. And I think particularly around our experiences of schools, I think it's worth us all reflecting on this, that most people had an experience in school that was a rough ride, usually caused by other kids, but sometimes perpetuated by students. I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s when Section 28, thank you, Margaret Thatcher, and I don't mind being political about this, banned gay people from being talked about in schools and from being defended. And I was beaten up in school, and the teachers knew why, and they couldn't do anything about it, and you couldn't say anything at home. And that's an experience that's lived with me throughout my whole life, and people have come back to me and apologized for that. And it's one of those experiences which while it sticks with you, people now tell me, well, you've got equality now and everything's right. Well, fine, to an extent. And I personally, and there's a point to saying this. It's not just me going, "Hey, I'm queer. You all need to know." The point of this is that these days I tend to find that a lot of people want to speak for you to your face, i.e., they want to tell you how you should feel, what things that you should like. I mean, the classic, well, you must like Drag Race because you're gay and it's done lots of great things for gay people. Well, actually, I'm not going to get into all of the politics of that, but gay people aren't all drag queens. So, go figure. It's not how I identify. So it's not something which culturally I feel very sort of close to. I feel close to the history, but not in my own identity. So I think you have to be very careful that you are creating environments for people to be who they are and to express themselves, rather than creating environments where you tell them how you think that they should behave or how you think that other people should feel comfortable. And I think what you say about the idea of fear, it really matters. But we're only ever going to get past this when we all take a responsibility, right? And the reason I've talked very personally about myself is that from my own experience, I can't expect other people to know everything about my experience and what upsets me and what doesn't. So I feel like I have a certain amount of responsibility to educate other people. But that has to come with that balancing act of, actually, I expect you to be respectful of everybody around you. So create an environment in the first place where it's safe for as many people as possible, and take that risk of getting it wrong and put something out there and check it before you do it. And I think that's the crucial thing, is the checking before you do. I remember years ago in an education establishment seeing a thing where they did something for LGBT History Month, which was all about sort of blow up pink and green stuff, which was done by a straight person. And it was all about doing selfies and putting wigs on. And that was, I found that really quite offensive. And my response was that I did a great big history wall, which defined a lot of the history. That was my response, my choice.
Mm.
So the thing is that not everybody you work with is going to either have the tools to express how to do things better or the will to do that, because people are tired, right? And you hear this a lot. People are tired of having to fight for their own rights and to fight to be seen and heard. But there's a difference between expecting somebody else to do all of the fighting and making an effort to create an equitable environment for everybody, and then going quietly to somebody and saying, right, we've done this. Can I check with you? Is this going to offend you, or have I done the right thing? Because most of the time, if you can actually say, I've made an effort here, and you have to be, again, you have to be cautious how you do this, because you don't want to other somebody.
Mhm.
You really don't. But at the same time, if we don't actually have conversations, and it might be that you don't talk to the person that you're directly, you talk to an organization, you find somebody in your community who's an advocate, and there are plenty of them. Do your research, do your homework, do your reading.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, 100% agree with that. And
And I must dive in and say, for anybody who's watching this who thinks, oh, yeah, it's really nervous. Yeah, I'm quite nervous making these statements. And hi to Twitter or X or whatever it's called. Um, I've lived a life of treading very carefully with audiences and performers from all over the world. So, when I wrote my book, the hardest bit of doing this was attending to not just what you do in terms of treating people fairly and equitably and creating good access and all of that, but actually how do you choose the right words to express it? And that's the really big thing. So, if you're watching this and something doesn't feel comfortable, then let's have a conversation about it. Don't set fire to me on Twitter, because I'll probably burn you back. But no, I say that jokingly, but I do say that with my tongue planted firmly in my cheek, but I think this is a real thing, that we can't have conversations which make the world better if every time somebody puts a foot slightly wrong through trying to do the right thing, that the rest of the world piles on, cancels them, destroys them, says all the wrong things. Let's focus our attention as human beings and as educators on actually encouraging people to have good conversations, meetings of minds, how to educate each other and share in a less caustic way than we often find at the moment. I rest my case.
I'm just going to send this all to Elon Musk and see what happens. I also, as
Hi,
you know,
Elon.
I also have those experiences on Twitter, and I will challenge people about music education, and that's one thing. If I see sexism, I will call that out, and that is a whole different ball game. Let me tell you, the responses are much angrier and much more aggressive and much more personal, than if we're talking about music education. I tell someone they've got something wrong. Generally, they might not want to admit that they're wrong, but it's not as personal and horrible as it sometimes is when you talk about other things. So yes, those conversations best had in the real world, I think, and not necessarily on social media. Top
Yes,
tip today,
absolutely.
and I'll now try and take my own advice and probably fail. But we've got now, I think, nicely into the zone about where we're talking about we've been talking about partnerships without even mentioning partnerships, haven't we? The idea that you can't do these things on your own, and you do have to bring in expertise where you need it, and you do need to check things, but it's not a case of just handing it all over to somebody else. It's the idea that actually you've got to create an environment where that person feels comfortable to bring you their needs and their issues that need solving. And one of the, as I said at the start, one of the themes in Unit 2 of the CME is about the characteristics of effective partnerships. And our learners, some of them are school-based, some of them are instrumental teachers who may or may not work in schools, or maybe do a bit of both. We have community musicians who run workshops and things. So we have a real mix of people. And when we look at partnerships, I would say this is the area that causes the majority of people, whatever their background is, the most difficulty in creating their evidence for this particular criterion, which is why I wanted to make sure we'd discuss that today. And they're asked to do three things. They're asked to identify the characteristics of effective partnerships, and then they're asked to talk about how they have run a partnership, or talk about other people's partnerships. And so any help and advice we can give them, because a lot of them, I would say, particularly we have, say, people like who are piano teachers who just teach in their own home, and they don't really have any experience of partnership working. So they have to work really hard to kind of think of a way to evidence this criterion, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. So I wondered what your thoughts were, because even if you are, say, a piano teacher on your own and you go, well, I just teach from home, there is no partnership. Arguably, you're still in a partnership with the parents and even your pupils, but also you've got the opportunity to organise a concert, haven't you? And a lot of private
Mhm.
teachers, that will be their only experience of partnership working, will be, once a term, I bring all my students together in a venue and we do some kind of concert. So I was wondering about your advice for how teachers can partner effectively with venues to offer performance and learning opportunities.
Well, this is an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think your example of the piano teacher is a good one. And I used to work with piano teachers who would come into our smaller venue because they wanted the really decent piano.
Mm.
Um, One of the things that I'd say is, and I'll give some general tips on planning concerts as well at the end. But I think the the crucial thing when you go into somebody else's venue is to trust that they do this all the time, or at least understand whether they do this all the time. You might go into a village hall where they open the doors and what happens in the room at the time is entirely up to whoever does it. But equally, you might go into a commercial venue, whether it's a small arts center or it's a conservatoire or whatever that might be, and they might be an environment where they are used to handling the audience and piano tunings and arranging seating and ticketing and lighting and all of those sorts of things. So the first thing that I would say is, and it's like any of these things, good dialogue. What do you know and what do you not know? So if you're going along to look at a venue, I spent a long time talking about venue viewings in the book because it's kind of crucial that you end up with a partnership with the person that you're dealing with, not just with the whole organization, but actually with your point of contact. Because you need to get to know each other and trust each other well enough that when you go along and say, right, I want to do my concert at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday, and they say to you, we start at 7:30. All our shows start at 7:30. Well, I want mine at 7. No, don't. Go 7:30. Reason is that if they're very strict about the start times, it's because all of their contracts and all of the people that they work with fit around that. If you start to try and disrupt the way that a venue works for your own ends, sure, venues will be as flexible as they can, but you may well find that you're lighting the touch paper on things going wrong. And it's not the same in all venues, right? And this is where the partnership conversation matters. Some venues will do exactly whatever you want, and they will literally pick up whatever you put on paper. So if you screw it up, it goes wrong. No, some venues will literally be a dry space. So if you say, we're arriving at 5 o'clock, we're going to do all our rehearsals and get an audience in and seated, and it's going to start at this time and we'll be finished at this time, all the pressure is on you to get your timings right. And certainly my experience of managing a venue, because I'd lived on both sides of the table, I wanted to work more in partnership with my clients as well, because it's better both ways round. So, anybody who's worked with me, and I've worked with a lot of teachers, will know that I'm quite forthright about saying, yes, I know that's what you want to do, but it's not a good idea. I've looked at your program. There's too much in it. You won't be finished before midnight. Um, and that's a really important thing, is that if you have a hire contract which has so many hours in it, you'll be expected to pay for it. And if you go beyond time, depending on the contracts that the people within the venue work on, you can end up with some very, very costly numbers. And it's not enough to say, oh, well, I'm a music teacher and I didn't really know. You're contracted to it. And you need to understand and read and respect the way that that works. So, classic example, I worked in a conservatoire with a commercial contract on the venue. And I would find that people would come along assuming that because they were a teacher and we had students, that we were a school hall.
Mm.
And therefore, we either didn't know what we were doing, they could go against all of the rules and do whatever the heck they wanted, or that we wouldn't actually charge them for the time. But it's expensive, staff cost a lot of money per hour. If you think what you charge, not you personally, Liz, looking through the camera at your participants, think about what you charge per hour. And then think about all of the expertise. So, thinking about partnerships, if you're, school concerts, good example. There's been a lot of movement over the last couple of years, and I think it's brilliant that collectives of schools are coming together and performing in larger venues so that you can bring more parents from different environments, etc., etc. So the length and duration of what you actually program, think very carefully about. And actually, back to the benefits for the performers and for the audience, you might have a whole load of bands who want to play from all of the schools. You have a choice. You can either put them all on and have something that goes on and on and on, and that means that the people who are up last have a bored audience or an empty audience, or everyone's running out while they're playing, or you do two concerts and you shorten the thing down. There's a cost implication, of course, but people will sponsor and parents will pay. Yeah, again, you have to think about what the price is of that. So that, back to EDI and accessibility, and are you being reasonable and all the rest of it, finding those middle grounds. But if you're going to try and put too much on stage, it's bad for the audience and it's bad for the performers. But then think about the tech. Good tech, and I used to have some very good tech to work with. The people who are providing, the PA systems, and if you've got somebody mixing your sound for you, they want to do the real best job that they can. And you have a partnership relationship which requires you to enable them to do that. And that means having all the information way in advance. So you lay your concert out so you can do your changes in a really good way. So if you've got, say you've got a piano and you've got a flute player, don't put it between two 10-piece bands that have loads of miking if you're going to have to strip the stage and put it all back on again. Because it's bad for the performers, it's bad for the audience because they have to sit and watch it, and it's really, really unkind to your technical people because they have to turn it round. What's more, if you've got all of that turned around, you're probably going to have to pay more because you're going to need more people on the stage to actually do the technical work that's required. And when somebody says it's going to take a bit of time, it's not that they're being awkward. They're being quite the opposite. So if somebody looks at your program and says, please don't do that. Yeah, musically, it might be a lovely contour. But if technically it's a horrible contour, then you're actually going to end up with a really bad set of gaps. So your flow through your program won't be good. So having those partnerships are really important. And I talk about this in the book. If you're working with technical people, trust that they actually know what they're doing, and they probably know a lot about music, and they will have heard it all, and they will have done a lot with it. There might be something unusual, fine, but explore it and have a conversation. And I always have this conversation with technical people too. Don't assume that the people you're working with don't know anything technical, but it cuts both ways. I've worked with teachers who've walked in and talked to me as if I know nothing, and when you turn around and say, actually, it's Dr. Paul, I've got a PhD in music, they look a bit shocked. But don't assume that because I work in the venue, I don't know the difference between one set of drums and another set of drums because I'm probably as well educated, if not more so, than you. And you will find that a lot of those technical people have that background and they have that knowledge and experience. You know, people move around from venues. So you'll find somebody who perhaps works in a smaller venue because they got a more senior job, who may well have worked somewhere, you know, they might have worked in the Albert Hall. You don't know. Ask them what they need. And, you know, if you don't know how to lay out your technical specifications and all of your information, get them to sit down with you and show you what, you know, what they need. And then when you make a decision that you're going to have the information to them by a specific date, get them the information by the specific date. All of it laid out in order of the program with all of the people, all of the instruments, absolutely everything in there. My biggest bugbear when I organize anything is getting 27 million emails, either from one person or a whole collection of different people. They're all in different formats. Sometimes it's a, you know, well, we'll need we'll need some amplifiers. That's a classic. We need some amplifiers, right? And so, yeah, we've got 2 guitarists and a bass player. And then on the day, 3 guitarists turn up and there's no bass player. Oh, well, we've got the bass on a track. What? The whole thing falls apart. So, you know, you need to be precise and be clear. And back to the experience of your students. It's important for them to learn that responsibility. When I was a teenager, I was very lucky because I got to study an early GCSE in information systems, and it taught me a lot, right? Because it was about things like, for example, and one I remember, you are going to print a document. What do you need? So, of course, you go, I want the software and I need the computer and I need to know what information I'm putting on and I need the printer. Everyone forgot to put the plug and the cable that connects the power socket, and I need a power supply. So going through that level of detail, what do you actually really realistically need? And if you can start to educate your students now, if you've got students who then go on to have their own ensembles or their bands or whatever, and they want to go on and do this, having that ingrained in them is really vital. You know, when I go out and perform and I do a quite a big electronica show, sort of one-man show or with a band, I go through absolutely every list of everything. And what sort of connection is it? What sort of cables am I using? How much power am I using? What are the venue providing? But also, what do I have? And what does the stage plan look like? You know, all of those kinds of things are really important. So I'm talking a lot about the stage side of things, but that's where your experience for your students comes from. And that's where a lot of the pain points will come from in working with a venue. Flip that to front of house. The people who work front of house in venues, if they have a box office.
I used to be one. I used to be one.
Yep.
I'm
Well,
waiting.
if
I'm waiting.
you will know this, right? If so, say you go into a local concert hall or a theatre and they have a box office and they say to you, you must use our box office. They're not saying it to be difficult. They're saying it because they want to make sure that you don't sell any more tickets than you are entitled to. They want to make sure that the experience of your audience is a really good one. And this is the thing, right? Your audience is their audience. Their audience holds their reputation in their hands. So my biggest bugbear, right? You sell a concert and you've got an ensemble comes along. I'm thinking about a big choir who I worked with at one point, who I can't name, where they had their own box office too. And we'd said, you do it through us. They then set up their own tickets that weren't proper tickets. Our tickets were numbered, and we'd not agreed to do anything other than that because the seats have numbers. But they sold tickets without numbers that said, just show this when you go in and sit anywhere. So then I'm getting screamed at by a crying person in the interval because apparently I've messed up their tickets. No, you got it wrong. And so the thing is that that person is the organizer. They have got to take responsibility because I told them. It's not enough to say, oh, well, we go to this other venue and this is what we do. Have some respect. You're in my venue now.
I
And
think
it's
what's
really
coming
important.
I think what's coming across quite strongly is this idea of respect and not making assumptions. And when you are
Mhm.
working in partnership with somebody else, you can't just assume that you'll be able to do whatever you like, but you also can't assume that they know certain things, and they
Mhm.
can't assume that you know those things either. So it's very
Yeah.
much kind of two-way process, isn't it? And being
It's having a
really
conversation, and it's about really listening actively to what people tell you and read the paperwork. People don't send you contracts and instructions and guidebooks and all of that sort of stuff for you to put it on your desk and go, oh, well, never mind, I'll do my own thing. And one thing I will say, and this is probably going to sound a little bit rude, but this comes from experience, is that I've worked with a number of teachers over the years who walk in with an assumption that because they do it all themselves in the classroom or in the school, that that's how the world works. The world outside of your little teacher bubble is not actually how the world works. That's it, you need to be willing to take your stuff out of your four walls and adapt it to everybody else's world, not the other way around. Because
what
for every one of you, how many others are there? And I think that's really crucial. And I know it sounds really rude, but I say it from bitter experience of getting there on the day and somebody getting really upset because they didn't listen to what you'd said. And you've got upset parents and you've got kids who are upset. And if when you get really good at it as a venue, then you can manage those things and you can handle those things. And, you actually second guess them and you prepare them. And the reason I'm really quite sort of strong about this is that this is coming from somebody who is always very willing to flex and to make the change and to spot your mistakes. You will also find there are people who are far less experienced than I was managing a venue and who will actually care less about helping you get it right because they are busy, busy people, and yours is probably the tiny, tiny little thing. So, it's a word of caution. It's partly about your ego, leave the ego at home. But it's also a word of warning that if you don't think ahead and you don't plan ahead and you don't do the partnership thing, then when it bites you on the bum later and you have a horrible relationship on the day, there's not a lot you can do about it if you didn't do your bit of the bargain.
absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes because we can be quite isolated, especially if we work in schools, and sometimes you are used to doing things a certain way, and you're also used to always being in charge. It's particularly a problem with head teachers, I have to say, but also heads of departments. And you just make the decisions, and you don't really have to think about other people in the way that you do when you're working in partnership in a venue or out in the community. And yes, I've seen some sticky situations from both ends, both as a teacher supporting those kind of events, and also from the event management side, where things, yeah, we have made those assumptions because that's the way we always do it at school. And of course, I'll just go here and I'll just do the same thing, and it's not necessarily the case. So we have chatted for quite a long time now. I just wanted to ask you if there was any other advice or things that you would like to say to people who are teaching music in general?
Oh, do you know, I've just been a bit forthright, haven't I? So let's go the other way. If you're teaching music to young people, well, to anybody, good on you. Absolutely good on you. And I think it's really important within this sort of context of the conversation we're having today about EDI and partnerships and some of the challenging stuff that around those are the things that sit around the core of keeping music alive. So find that balance in yourself about the importance of the work that you do, because music education and generally cultural life and cultural education is so much at risk. And um, there are plenty of us out here who are able to provide services or support to do those other bits. I've been quite forthright in some of the things I've said because I know that this is backing up a qualification, right? And it's backing up that training. I mean, these are things that I believe, and I believe quite strongly, but at the heart of it, those relationships that you're cultivating, really really matter with those young people. And I think explaining the value of that education is really important. The cultural impact, the transferable skills, the ability to go on stage. I'm a keynote speaker these days, and I love it. I've learned so much about how to do that on a whole range of different topics because of my history in music. Now, I don't perform as a professional singer these days. It's not my source of income. I write music for money, but I don't perform much for cash. Um, but it doesn't matter. That what you learn from that and the way that you interact with the world is really quite vitally important. And so when we're talking about doing events, I think being able to articulate that importance and that vitality, when we're talking about partnerships, if you can get the venue to understand what that impact is, not just in a community, but how life-changing it is for those students to be able to go on stage and have those powerful moments in front of their family. I think that's really important. There's another side to this too, which we mentioned audiences, be they parents, guardians, friends, stuffed animals, doesn't really matter. But I think we have a responsibility too to through those educational relationships to kind of educate people how to be good audiences. And I don't mean sitting quietly and behaving in a classical music sense. But I do mean things like if you've got a music school and you're putting a concert on, be quite forthright with the attendees, not to go and just hear their own and then leave noisily during everybody else's performances. Because it's not only bad for the people who are on stage, but it actually it starts to create a cultural downsizing in terms of the value of performance. And it creates an environment where actually there's a lack of respect. Not everybody that we put on stage as young people wants to be a professional musician. For a lot of them, they're going to be bankers or insurance brokers or, driving a car or doing this or that, the other. It doesn't really matter. But it's kind of important that they learn that respect for the performance environment, whatever that might be. And I think it's quite crucial that we make a stand on this at the moment, because especially, I think if you're talking about EDI, actually, that not everybody has the kind of experience in their upbringing that enables them to go and experience theatre or a concert hall or whatever. Not everybody knows the social mores, and I think some of the social mores are wrong, but that's another whole argument. But if we can create environments where that respect is built in for what's happening on stage, then you don't end up with those ridiculous situations that we've seen recently, like the Mamma Mia performance with the shouting woman, and the Bodyguard in Manchester, which was just quite shocking, really. With somebody caterwauling at the top of their voice at the back because they think it's cheap karaoke. And there's the back to that respect thing. Why are an audience there? To be communicated with, and they spend good money on being in those environments. And the same, in school concerts, we mentioned fees before, but it's also about that respect for the person on the stage and getting our young people in all of those ways to understand and experience what happens on stage and how it feels. Right back to the beginning of our conversation about that nervousness and that relationship between the two. If we can be building that and creating that and curating that for our young people, then I hope that we can, get past this, oh, well, it was the pandemic and everything's broken now nonsense. And I don't mean everyone sits in silence. I mean, I think the fact that you're not allowed to use you have your mobile phone anywhere near you in certain environments, don't take a photograph of anything. Well, yeah, don't watch a concert with your phone in the air. I'm not a big fan of that. But at the same time, you know, I'm quite a big fan of the idea that concert programs are on your mobile phone now through a QR code. I've been screamed at for doing that, So we have to move with the times, but we can only do that if we have this culture of respect in all of what we do, which I think goes back to the heart of what music and culture is really about. It's about understanding each other, and it's about respect, and understanding each other breeds respect. It breeds a better world. And, I think that takes us full circle to where we started from, really.
Absolutely, I think it does. Thank you so much, Paul. Can you tell us where we can get hold of a copy of your book?
Yes, there are several places. It is available to order on all kinds of places. However, I would say if you go to www.eventsareeasy.co.uk, then you can click the links in there to get to either Amazon, or if you want a signed copy, there are some available you can get from me. And I will be doing an offer specifically for people who are working with you, Liz.
Oh, how lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much. So just for our I was gonna say listeners, and then I was like, no, watchers, but then watchers sounds wrong as well. Viewers, that's the word I was looking for. Um, obviously, we will have people from our own CME on here, but also these videos can be freely available on our YouTube channel. So if you have found us and you want to know more about the CME, you can find a link below the video. And if you are a current student or a prospective student and you want to be notified about these videos, you can subscribe to our channel as well. So thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, everyone, and speak to you all soon.